Hi guys, hope you're all doing well. Back to the next factoring method. So far we've covered factoring using a GCF, greatest common factor. Then we covered factoring trinomials where the leading coefficient was equal to 1. And today we're going to look at factoring by grouping. So factoring by grouping uses the greatest common factor. So if you had trouble with that or you don't really remember because it's been a little bit, then I suggest that you go back to the videos talking about the greatest factor, the greatest common factor, and how to factor it out before you start this lesson. So factoring by grouping. When you're going to use this method is when you have a polynomial that has 4 terms in it. Then you're going to look to see if you can factor by grouping. So here's the steps you're going to follow. First step, and this goes with anytime you are factoring, no matter what type of polynomial you are giving, the first thing you're always going to look for is there a greatest common factor of all the terms in the polynomial? If there is, factor that out of everything first. Then you'll take a look at what's left in parentheses to see which method you're going to use to continue to factor if it's possible. So when you're looking at a polynomial that has 4 terms, if you factor GCF out first, then in the parentheses, you should still have 4 terms. And then you can use this process to keep factoring. Or if there is no GCF to factor out of all 4 of them, then just look at the 4 terms that you have. The first thing we're going to do is group the first 2 terms using parentheses. We're going to take the first 2 terms, put them in parentheses, and create a group, hence grouping method. Then we're going to do the same thing with the last 2 terms. Again, grouping them in parentheses. We're going to keep all the signs inside parentheses. Then we're going to write a plus sign between the 2 groups. Then we're going to look at each group individually. So we're going to take a look at that first group of 2 terms we put in parentheses. We're going to see, is there a GCF that we can factor out of that group? If there's no GCF, we must factor something out. So that's the case where we would actually factor out a 1. In the past, we haven't done that. Then we're going to do the same step for the second group of terms. Find the GCF and factor that out. If you do this correctly, what's left in parentheses for each group after a GCF is factored out should be the same thing. We're going to take that binomial that's the same and write it in parentheses on the next line. And then there should be 2 terms left outside that we didn't use, and we're going to write those together in the second set of parentheses as the second binomial. So I know that was a lot of information without actually seeing what it is that I was talking about. My suggestion here is that you pause the video, write these steps down so that you have them next to you as you're working through. So let's start taking a look. Here we have 20x to the third minus 12x squared plus 15x minus 9. There's 4 terms there, so eventually we're going to take a look at doing grouping method. But remember, the first thing we always need to check is there a greatest common factor of all 4 of those terms? Well, I have 20, 12, 15, and 9. The factors of 9, and I'm choosing that because that's the smallest number there. So the factors of 9, I have 1, 9, and 3, and 3. So 1, 3, and 9 are my factors. 1 will not be a GCF for everything to factor out. So let me look at 3. Well, 20 cannot be evenly divided by 3. So 3 is not a GCF of all of those terms. And then 9, again, 20 cannot be divided by 9. So we do not have a GCF. That's a number. Let's look at the variables. This is x to the third, x squared, x to the first, no x. They do not all have an x, so they do not all have a GCF of a variable either. So no GCF to take out first. So let's go into grouping. So grouping said that we need to group the first two terms by putting parentheses around them. So I have 20x to the third minus 12x squared. I'm going to group them and use parentheses. Then I'm going to group the second two terms, keeping the signs inside. And then I'm going to put a plus in between. The next thing I'm going to look for is a GCF in each group. So the GCF of this first group. So I have 20 and I have 12. The GCF of those two numbers is 4. X to the third, x squared. They both have x's. The one with the smallest exponent is x squared. So the GCF of that first group is 4x squared. So I'm going to factor that out. There we go. Okay, going to factor that out. So 20x to the third divided by 4x squared. 20 divided by 4 is 5. X to the third divided by x squared is x. And then negative 12 divided by 4 is negative 3. X squared divided by x squared cancels each other out. So I found this GCF of the first group and factored it out of that first group. Now I'm looking for the GCF of my second group. Well, the GCF of that group, 15x minus 9, GCF is going to be positive 3. I need to make sure that I'm writing that sign here, plus 3. Positive 3 is our GCF we're going to factor out. So I'm going to now factor that out. 15 divided by 3 is 5. We had an x, didn't take an x out, so it's still there. Negative 9 divided by 3 is negative 3. So remember, the next step, sorry about that. So the next step says if we did that correctly, the two binomials that are inside the parentheses should match. They should be exactly the same thing. And if you look here, 5x minus 3, 5x minus 3, they are. So that is a clue to me that I am on the right path. They should match like that. So I'm going to take those two and write them once. I'm going to write 5x minus 3 in parentheses as my first binomial. And then essentially what we're doing is that's the greatest common factor. We now have two terms, right? Split where this plus is. The left side is one term, the right side is another term. What they have in common is 5x minus 3. So I'm writing that. Then we are taking that out, which leaves us with these two terms that were outside the parentheses. So we're going to write them as their own binomial in the next set of parentheses. 4x squared plus 3. So here is our factored answer. It's the product, right? The multiplication of two binomials. Binomial times a binomial. Now keep in mind, we discussed in the last lesson that those two binomials could be switched. You could write them the other way as 4x squared plus 3 times the quantity 5x minus 3. That would be the same thing. Let's take a look at another example here. 3x minus 6 plus xy minus 2y. So this one has two different variables in it. This one is going to be very similar to the Google Doc assignment, the first assignment you're going to need to do this week. It's a guided practice Google Doc. So you may want to make note of the time of this video so that if you need help, you can come back to this time in the video to help you through that Google Doc. So again, first thing we always want to check, is there a greatest common factor? Well, I have 4 terms here. I have a 3, a 6, a 1, and a 2. So there's not going to be any GCF with those. The most we have is a 1. Then we have x, no variable, x, y, and a y. So they do not all have the same variable. So there's no overall GCF to factor out first. Let's go into our grouping method. Our first step is to group the first 2 terms, then group the second 2 terms, keeping all the signs inside the parentheses, and put a plus in between. Now we look for a GCF in the first group. 3x minus 6, that GCF is going to be 3. And then I can factor it out. Then we look for a GCF in our second group. This one may not be quite as obvious. I have xy and I have 2y. They have no number in common, but they do both have a y. So I can take out positive y. Again, I must have a sign there, otherwise it's going to look like multiplication. It's not. So plus y. And then I can factor that out of everything in the second group. Leaves me with x minus 2. So if we did that correctly, what's in the parentheses should match. X minus 2, x minus 2. It does. So I'm going to write that as the first binomial, x minus 2. And then I take that out of both of them, and I am left with a 3 plus y. I'm going to write that as my second binomial. So this is my factored answer written as a product of 2 binomials. Quantity of x minus 2 times the quantity 3 plus y. Okay, let's keep going. So looking for a GCF first. There is no GCF of all 4 of those terms, so we're going to go right into grouping. Parentheses, keeping all the signs inside, and put a plus in between the 2 groups. Then I find a GCF of my first group. The GCF of that is going to be 7x squared. And then I factor that out of the first group. Leaving me with 5x plus 4. Then, oops, not sure where that straight line came from. Then I'm going to look for a GCF in my second group. Well, the GCF is 2, but remember back to when we learned about GCF. If the first term in the polynomial, so first term in this group, is negative, then the GCF I take out needs to be a negative. So I'm going to take out a negative 2. We'll factor that out and see what it leaves us with. So negative 10 divided by negative 2 is positive 5. Have that x. Negative 8 divided by negative 2 is positive 4. So now you can see what we have in parentheses matches. If I did not take out that negative 2, if I only took out a positive 2, then I would have been left with negative 5x minus 4. That is different then 5x plus 4. We would not be able to go any further. So if you end up with something that looks like that it's close but not quite, come back here and see, did you take the appropriate sign out? Did you take that sign out of both of those terms or just the first one? Right? That is a thing to double check. So we have 5x plus 4 in both sets of parentheses. We know we're on the right track because they match. So we're going to write that binomial. And then we're going to see what's left over. Outside the parentheses, we have 7x squared minus 2. So we're writing them as their own binomial inside parentheses. And there's our factored answer written as a product of two binomials. Okay, next one, we have 12m to the third plus 9m squared plus 4m plus 3. I'm going to suggest that you pause the video and you try this problem. And when you think you have your answer, unpause and go through it with me and see how you did. So checking first, there is no GCF of all of those terms. So we're going to go right into our grouping method. There's 4 terms. That's how we know we're going into grouping. Group the first 2, group the second 2, keeping all signs inside, and put a plus in between. Find the GCF of our first group, and that is going to be a 3m squared. And factor it out of the first group. Find GCF of our second group. Okay, this may be where you were working where you might have gotten stuck. If we go back to those steps that I discussed, if there is no GCF, the steps say you must factor out a 1. We must take something out. So if there is no GCF, we're going to take out a 1. The first term is positive, we're taking out a positive 1. When we divide by 1, that doesn't change anything, so that binomial is going to look the same inside the parentheses. 4m divided by 1 is still 4m. 3 divided by 1 is still positive 3. So we have the same thing in both sets of parentheses, 4m plus 3. Take that out. And in the other set of parentheses, we are left with 3m squared plus 1, written as a product of two binomials. If you did not factor out that positive 1, you would be missing that piece here. And then if you were to remultiply this out using distributive property to double check yourself, you would not end up back here. You must factor that out. Okay, let's look at 2 more examples, but now these are going to have a GCF that we can factor out first. So 30x to the third plus 210x squared plus 48x plus 336. If you see really large numbers that you're not used to seeing, there's a very good chance that there is a GCF you can factor out of everything first to make those numbers smaller and a little more manageable. So if we look at all of these numbers, if we list the factors of 30, again, because it's the smallest number, it's going to have the least amount of factors we need to try, and divide all those other numbers, you would find that 6 can be evenly divided out of all of those. So 6 is going to be our overall GCF. Oh, that may not be a good color on this blue. Let's go purple. So 6 is going to be our overall GCF. We're going to factor that out of everything. Now, I'm using brackets because I know eventually inside with these 4 terms that will be left over, I'm going to have to group them using parentheses. And I don't want to get confused where one group starts and where another ends. So I'm using a different type of parenthesis. I'm using brackets to go around everything so I can use my parentheses later. So let's figure out here what's left over. When we divide that out, we'll be left with 5x to the third plus 35x squared plus 8x plus 56. So we factored a GCF out of all of the terms. It's still in the problem. We just pulled it out front. And now we have much smaller numbers to look at. Still have 4 terms in this group in my brackets, so I'm going to continue using grouping method, factor it further. So first 2 terms, second 2 terms, second group, keep all signs inside and put a plus in between. This GCF is just going to continue coming down through every step of the problem. Make sure that you don't drop that off. If you throw it away, then you're changing the value of the problem. So first group, the GCF of that first group is going to be a 5x squared. And we will factor that out, leaving us with an x plus 7. And then the second group, GCF, is positive 8. And we'll factor that out, also leaving us with an x plus 7. So again, we know we're on the right track because what's inside the parentheses matches each other. So don't forget, bring this GCF down. And now I no longer need to worry about those bigger brackets. I can just write my polynomials. So I have x plus 7 and then I have what's left over, 5x squared plus 8. And there is my factored answer. 6 times the quantity x plus 7 times the quantity 5x squared plus 8. Okay, I know that was a lot of information. Let's try one more of those. We have 40m to the fourth minus 100m to the third minus 8m squared plus 20m. Looking for a GCF first. They all have 4 in common. But look, they all also have m. The lowest exponent is m to the first, so we can take 4m out of each of those terms. Put my brackets, and then factor the 4m out of all of those terms, leaving us with 10m to the third minus 25m squared minus 2m plus 5. And I want to make sure for my next line I bring the GCF down. I don't want to throw it away. It needs to stay in the problem. And we're going to go ahead and group our terms that are inside these brackets. So first 2 terms, second 2 terms, keeping all the signs inside, putting a plus in between. So our first group, looking for a GCF, that's going to be 5m squared. And factor that out of the first group. That's going to leave us with 2m minus 5. Then we look for GCF. of our second group? Well, 2m and 5, they don't have anything in common, but remember, we must take something out. So if there's no GCF, then we must take out a 1. But look here, the first term in that group is negative, so this time we're going to have to take out a -1. So we'll factor -1 out, so -2m divided by -1 is +2m. +5 divided by -1 is -5. So here again, if you did not take out a -1, these signs would be different. They have to be exactly the same in these two groups to keep moving forward. So 2m minus 5 matches 2m minus 5. We're going to come down to the next line, bringing our GCF along, 4m. Then we're going to write the same parentheses, so 2m minus 5. Take that out, and that will leave us with what's left over, which is 5m squared minus 1. There is our factored answer. So your assignments for this week, there are 2 assignments that are posted in Google Classroom. This video is attached to both of them, so it's the same video on both. I just wanted to make it easy to access for you so that it's right there. The first assignment I want you to complete is the one that's highlighted in pink there. That is the one that is a guided practice Google Doc. So make sure that you do that first and submit it. In a second, I'm going to show you what you need to do on that. And the other assignment there, this one down here, is a quizzes activity. So a couple things I want to point out with this. Please remember, use your first and last name and your student Google account when you're signing into quizzes. Recently, people have been using first names or nicknames, and then I can't tell who did what. So if you only use your first name or a nickname, you're risking not getting credit for what you did. Please, 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 first and last name. Okay, the other thing with this quiz is, it is not just the factoring. It is partially factoring, but then just under half the questions are old material from any time during this year. There can be probability, there can be solving the equations, there can be box plots. So I want you to make sure you're reviewing that. You might want to grab your folder with your notes. If you don't have that, go into Google Classroom. I have all the notes posted from the year. You can look that stuff over. So before you started that, I just wanted to give you a heads up that there is review material that's not just factoring with there. And again, like always, you can take that unlimited times to improve your grade. Again, if you take it twice and you're still not happy with your grade, then reach out to me. Let me know and I can help you so you've got a better shot the next time. So back to that Google Doc, I wanted to show you here. This is what the Google Doc will look like. Factor by group and guided practice. So here's the problem you're going to be factoring, and then it's going to take you step by step through the process. Everywhere you see a box that says type your answer here, that's where you are completing things. You will just type your answer in there. Okay. And again, if you have any questions, refer back to this video, and that should help you through the process. So the other thing I wanted to point out, when you are finished answering these, it's worth a total of 10 points. There's kind of a check-in at the bottom here where it says drag the arrow to point at the picture that describes how you are feeling. So you're going to go right over this arrow, click, hold it in, and you can drag that and drop it above how you are feeling. Okay? Once you do that, you can turn it in, and then I will check it and give you any comments, feedback that I think is necessary. If you have any questions, we can go through that as well. Okay, guys, that's going to do it for this week. Hope everybody's doing well. I miss you guys, and reach out if you need any help. Talk to you soon.